Welcome to the Retiring Well podcast. My name is Charlie Jordan. I'm your host, and I am so glad you joined me today. Our mission here at Retiring Well is simple. We want to help you do just that, to retire well. We're going to look at more than just the money and examine multiple aspects of life and retirement and how your wealth can be used to improve your life and the life of others. This is Retiring Well. Well, welcome to the Retiring Well podcast. My name is Charlie Jordan. I am your host. Today, I'm really excited about something we're going to be doing, and that is a book review. As part of our Retiring Well Connection emails that we send out, we actually have done this every quarter, something we call the Retiring Well Book Club. And that's just a way for us to take a quick dive into books that we think will be valuable resources for our clients and our readers and now listeners that we think will be really helpful for their retirement journey. And so today we're going to be taking a closer look at Dan Pink's Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. And joining me to discuss this book is going to be Chase Mouchet. Chase is a fellow partner and advisor with me here at CI Brightworth. So Chase, thanks for joining me today.
It's great to be here, Charlie.
So when I think about regret, that's obviously something that's kind of negative. It's not exactly something you want to dive into. When I saw this book for the first time come out, I was intrigued mainly because it's Dan Pink's. I've been a fan of his for years. I get his newsletter every single month. But regret's not exactly a book you want to just dive into. In fact, I
talk about regret.
That's right. That's right. It's a negative, and it even says in the book, it's a negative emotion, and it's a negative backward-looking emotion. And I actually bought the book and sat on it for about 2 months. I just didn't really want to read it. It just didn't really intrigue me. But when I finally dug into it, I realized, wow, this is incredibly powerful. This is powerful for anyone. But I also see in the work that we do with retirees, this can be an incredibly valuable tool for retirees who I think, as you and I work with folks, we see that regret kind of come out in many, many ways. And I said, Chase, this is something we ought to talk about. So encourage you to get the book and read it. And now what we want to do is just kind of spend a few minutes just talking about the book and our main takeaways, but then really start to dig into how those takeaways can really be useful for retirees. Where can we see this playing out in the work that we do as advisors? How can retirees who are maybe dealing with regret in some way be able to create a strength out of this? And actually, as the book says, how looking backward moves us forward. So looking forward to the conversation today. But Chase, when you think about your initial reaction to, hey, you need to read this book, The Power of Regret, what were your thoughts?
Well, it is an important topic, and we're talking about it here today because regret can impact your wallet positively or negatively. So it's a great conversation to have, a great topic. But it does have a lot of relevancy to retirees as we think about our lives and decades of maybe working and then transitioning. It's a big transition into retirement, and people have different versions of retirement and what it looks like in that phase of life. But I think it's really important to think about the types of regrets and not only just stop at the negativity, but how do we turn it around and look to the future? And I think that was one of the most hopeful tones, I guess, of the book, is that beyond just sort of sitting in your regret, that there's some steps we can take. Maybe it's financially, maybe it's relationally, maybe it's other things we've wanted to do for many, many years. I think it's especially relevant to retirees as I think about the future. So yes, he wrote it generally for the population, for us to think about it, for all of us. But as you said, I think there's a lot of good applications from what he shares in the story, in the book, and also just a lot of research behind it. He cites, as you know, a lot of research that a lot of good examples that we can use as we think about what does retirement look like.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I think we oftentimes kind of wallow in our regret. And, one of the things that the book points out is this is meant to be something that we use to make us better. In fact, one of the things that he does in this book is he actually did a major study of, I think it was called the American Regret Study or something along those lines, where he just, it was the largest study ever done on regret, polled all these people about what they did regret about different areas of their life and looking back. And he kind of came up with sort of 4 broad categories as he kind of looked at all of this data. And it's very interesting to think about these, because I think retirees can see these playing out in their lives as they kind of look back. And the 4 categories were foundational regrets, which was kind of if I had only done the work. And I think in the world we're in, that's usually I didn't save enough money. I didn't do the blocking and tackling. There's things I wish I had done that I didn't do. And it's not overly dramatic. It's more of that sort of over time, you kind of look back and say, oh, if only I had done that, it'd been fine. And then the one that really sticks out to me is the boldness regret.
Yeah, same here.
And that one is if I had only taken the chance. And they said in the book that was the most prevalent regret overall, is if I just done that thing that was a little risky, that was a little bit outside of my comfort zone. If I'd just done that, then things may have been different. The third one was moral regret. So if I'd only done the right thing. So these are sort of moments of, indiscretion or things that happen that they look back on and say, oh man, if I'd only done the right thing, things would have been differently. And then finally, I see this a lot, and I'm sure we can talk about this quite a bit, is connection regrets.
Yes.
And that's sort of the relational piece, which is he says, if I had only reached out. Let's kind of sit on that one for a little bit, because I think one of the things that we probably run into more than anything else when we're working with folks who are in retirement or nearing retirement, work life was such a big part of their life. And for many of them, the sacrifice was the relationships, a lot of the family relationships, maybe the marital relationships, et cetera. And we see that when we kind of work with our clients, don't we?
We do. We see it all the time. And I think that's broadly speaking as well. In the book, Pink talks about how that is, I think, the highest regret for folks who are later on in life. So this is a big deal. And for us to think about, how do we use our wealth to maybe improve those relationships? Money doesn't solve all problems. We all know that. But how do you use money, and how do you use the time that you have maybe in retirement to think about improving those relationships? And yes, it is, that connection regret is pretty prevalent as we think about retirees in that stage of life.
One of the things that Pink does in the book, he also makes a distinction between regrets of action and inaction. Regrets of action would be, I did this, I shouldn't have done that. And inaction is, I didn't take the action. I just kind of passed on it. And it's interesting because he talks about retirees have more regrets of inaction. And part of it is not that they didn't do things that they probably regretted early in their life, but they've probably had a chance to maybe even rectify those things. You do something wrong, you have a chance to fix it. You do something that you wish you hadn't have done, maybe you have an opportunity to kind of correct it. But as folks get older and they get later in their life, I think they start to say, goodness, I've kind of tried to rectify most of the things that I could, but there's a lot of regrets of things I didn't do. I'm kind of running out of time. I'm getting to this place where if I haven't done it by now, then it's not going to happen. And I think that's actually the big lie that many retirees run into. We see that a lot, don't we?
We do. And I think about, for example, a career, a 30, 40-year career, and maybe that individual has thought about starting a new business on their own, consulting, just pivoting a bit, shifting to something they've always thought about as a dream for a while. And then time goes on, and then they're unable to really kind of get to that point in time where they can transition. So that's that inaction regret, in a sense, that boldness regret where they're not able to. But there's still time for a lot of folks. There's still time to still do that. And I think it's important to even have some encouragement and some people around you. That's one of the things Pink talks about. Like, how do you create that circle, those relationships that can encourage you to maybe do things like that in the future? So yes, it is something certainly we see all the time. Well, when we think about the transition into retirement, for many people who either have a retirement where it's a lot of time available, a lot of freedom of time after they make that transition, many of them may not think about 40 plus hours a week that they're spending either at home with their spouse they didn't spend previously. We see that. Or also just other activities and maybe other work too, maybe part-time work or consulting. So that is one of the big areas as we think about preparing for retirement. It's how are you going to spend your time in retirement? We have the ideal week in retirement worksheet to help people think about mornings, afternoons, evenings in a typical week in retirement. How do they think about it? But I found that exercise and that conversation to create some good context and really painting a picture for the future in retirement when you have 40 plus hours to spend, whether it's on yourself, others, and thinking about the future. But I find that if you fast forward a bit, many people struggle with all that time available to them. And how do they handle that? And what do they do with it? Some people are fine, but I've observed that many people struggle with that freedom of time. And what do they do going forward?
All right, Chase, we have talked about a lot of negative things at this point, a bunch of regret. And I already regret talking so much about negative things. But the question people are going to want to know is, okay, what do I do with this? And how do I move on from it? And the book offers a few points, and I certainly would recommend anyone read through the book. This isn't going to do it justice, but there's a couple of things that he really points out that I think are very helpful for people. The first is undo it if you can. That would maybe be, hey, go apologize to someone you need to apologize to, or make something right. They say finding confidants in people. And I would say that as a financial advisor, we play that role more often than I ever thought when I first got into this business. We hear from people what they really regret. And we've seen that now through some of the tools that we put together, especially the Elements of Retirement tool that allow people to actually kind of take stock of different areas of their life and kind of rate their level of satisfaction. I think some of these things are coming sort of out of that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And he talks about in the book how we can find what we value most by identifying our regrets. So not just sitting the regrets and spend time there, but on the flip side. So if only I did something, that could be a value of growth and wanting to do better and continue to learn and have purpose. Stability could be sort of the flip side of making bad financial decisions. So I think that's a really good way that he expresses in the book and talks about just thinking about the flip side of that. We can uncover what we truly value most by thinking about the regrets and taking the flip side of those and really identifying what is important to us.
Another area that he mentioned that I thought was really, really profound is he mentioned this idea of self-compassion. It's kind of a little bit of a take on the golden rule in some ways, but almost the opposite. It's kind of treat yourself as you treat others. If you knew someone who was going through something similar to you, how would you give them advice? Whole different approach to it than often we do for ourselves, where we beat ourselves up. That's right.
That voice in our head telling us that we're no good and it's who we are, but it's really not. It's maybe a decision that we made in the past, but it's not who we are at the core.
Yeah. And the other two that he mentions is they're kind of related, kind of giving space and time. So that whole kind of go to the balcony and view it from the 30,000 foot view and say, in the grand scheme of things, is this really that bad? Or give it time. 10 years from now, is this even going to matter?
On that point, Charlie, he talks about the types of regrets to really focus energy on and improving in the future versus the ones that just let it go. If you made a mistake or decision, buying this washer or dryer or that brand or this brand, I think it's a good reminder to let some things go. If you make a mistake or don't make the right decision, it's okay if you didn't buy the right brand of a certain product and kind of move on from there. So I think it can free up a lot of energy and maybe stress as we think about how do we focus our time and our energy.
I agree with that. One of the things that you can do is use your wealth to actually do something about some of these regrets of either action or inaction. And I'll give an example. We had one client that when we went through the Elements of Retirement conversation, family was one of their biggest gaps in their levels of satisfaction. And part of that was just the regret of the lack of time that they had been spending together. Some of that was COVID related, but then that almost became one of those things where they didn't know how to kind of broach that going forward. And so it was partly a connection regret. If only I reached out, if only I sort of made the first step. And I think both sides were probably waiting to make the next step, but they're also looking at, they live across the country from one another and it's expensive to go see each other and all these other things. And just pointing out that they had ample resources to be able to take that step, to go buy the plane ticket. If you need to stay in a hotel, stay in a hotel. Like, you can do all that and be able to say, this area is important to me, and I don't want to have deeper regret in this area of my life. So using your wealth to improve your life is the premise of Retiring Well. And we really see that this is a way that could be a tool that could be used to answer some of these questions people are asking right now.
Absolutely. And another example I can think of is related to home. Where do you live? So maybe on that point as well. I've had clients where they've thought about a decision to live maybe part-time somewhere else near the beach or some other part of the country. And they think about that being a forever decision and they get paralysis behind it. But it's also connected to family. They want to be able to spend time with grandkids, kids, those weekends throughout the year, and they can use their wealth, right, in a way to improve those relationships and create space and time to be together.
I think the big takeaway with all of this is it is a backward looking emotion, but it can be used for us to learn and to be better at every age. And so that's the main message that I got from the book. That's the main message that I hope our listeners hear, is that while we all would love to say we have no regrets, regrets can be very useful for us. And they are ways in which we can improve our lives and the lives of others. But there's also ways we can plan for it. So any final thoughts on that?
Totally agree with everything you said, Charlie. And those are my main takeaways as well. I think pausing, looking out 1, 3, 5 years, as he talks about in the book, just visualizing what the future could look like if you make a decision, maybe you're a boldness decision, a work decision, just pausing and thinking about, not overanalyzing, but thinking about what that could look like, because we do have decisions that can impact the future, and looking ahead and spending some time and thinking about relationships, because money and relationships do tie in together. I think that was a really, really good takeaway as we think about how do we plan for the future and how do we make the most and use our wealth to improve our lives.
Awesome. Well, Chase, thanks for joining me today. This was good. We'll look forward to doing the next book next quarter. And I would just encourage everyone to take a look at this book. It's, again, Dan Pink's The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. Thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Retiring Well podcast. We also have a monthly newsletter called the Retiring Well Connection. It's a great curation of articles about life and retirement that we think is valuable and helpful. And there's a link to subscribe to that newsletter in the show notes, as well as a link to the Elements of Retirement self-assessment that can give you a look at where you feel like there are gaps in areas of life and retirement. Until next time, I'm Charlie Jordan. Thanks again for listening. Take care.